Confess by Rob Halford, summary and review, part 2. Hi, welcome to Garage Geek. This episode is brought to you by The Naked Civil Servant by Quentin Crisp. Thank you, Mr. Halford, for inspiring me to finally read this book that has been on my shelf forever. Look for a review in one of my Friday night chats. So the middle part of the book begins with Mr. Halford going out of control. He's pulled over for drinking. His relationship with Brad is very destructive due to alcohol and drugs. He was working on Turbo, the album Turbo at the time. He cringes thinking about it. He would go into the bathroom and do drugs in between each take. At this time, he starts to become violent, and this is something in his life that he's never done before. And he has a violent fight with Brad. At this point, he decides that he wants to kill himself. And he repeats to himself over and over again, "Nobody loves me." Every time he would say that, he would take a swig of Jack Daniels and a pill. Nobody loves me. Swig, pill, swig, pill. But something in the back of his head warns him, and he finally goes out and he tells David, and he says, I think I've OD'd, and they rush to the hospital. Rob Halford told himself, you know what, I have to stop. And he was able to do it. He kind of turned off a switch, and he didn't do any more drugs or alcohol. But once he made that decision, he said he was able to stick by it. And he was, at the time of writing the book, 34 years sober. After he gets out of rehab and he's dealing with this situation, he goes back to Turbo and he reworks it. Now, one big mistake that he and the band made is they were offered to put one of the songs from Turbo, I believe, I think the song is called Reckless, into the movie Top Gun, and they decided not to do that. And of course, in the movie Top Gun pretty much made the careers of all the people in it. It just would have been such a huge career booster, and he realizes that was a mistake. However, at this time that he's off of the pills and the alcohol, he realizes again the joy of singing. It just becomes infectious for him, and he loves to perform again. In fact, after he would do his gigs, he would, I believe, call Brad on the phone, or it might have been someone else that he was seeing at the time, and he would sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot on the phone to help the person get to sleep. Now, at this point, Brad is still on drugs, and he's very volatile, and no matter what, Rob Halford understands that for everyone, the point of recognition where you know you have to get off drugs and alcohol or die is different for everyone, and he couldn't force it on Brad. He was sober, and Brad was still living the crazy lifestyle with drugs and alcohol, very volatile, and they get into a huge fight. Now, at this point, he also does ask the band if he can do a solo project, but just as an aside. Okay, it was very clear that he just wanted to do something a little different as an aside, and they agreed as long as it didn't interfere with what was going on in Judas Priest. And around this time, Brad actually shoots himself. Rob Halford was able to go and see Brad in the hospital one last time. He was on life support, but that was the last time that he was able to see him. Now later, he was near a Jamaican psychic, and she started talking about Brad, and she talked about something that only the two of them knew about. And so Rob Halford is convinced that there is a afterlife, and that people in this life go somewhere else, and they are waiting for us. Now, he recorded a disco album, but it was shelved, and up to this point, I don't think it's been released. He also took part in AIDS marches, and he still wonders why nobody has noticed this and nobody's published anything. Now, at this time, something really huge happens, or happened before. During the time of Stained Class, which was an earlier album, there was a lawsuit brought about by parents because two kids were in a suicide pact, and one kid died, and then the other one was shot in the face and was permanently disfigured. At around this time, it's finally going to court, and of course they were talking about messages in the song when being played backward. And I got a bunch of comments about this on my last video, so a lot of people were cognizant of this aspect of Judas Priest's career. This part of the autobiography relates what happened. Geraldo Rivera tried to get Judas Priest on his program with the parents, and when they refused, he put up chairs on the stage and called them something like heavy metal cowards. Oh no, heavy metal chickens. Now, one thing that came up, so in the comic Preacher, there's a character called Assface, which I believe is based on the character of the child or the young man who survived the suicide pact, and the parents sued the band Judas Priest. Now, I haven't confirmed that. I'll put but as the comment, as one of my commenters wrote, it might have been No Solution. I'm not sure. It's unbelievably cruel, but that's the kind of writer that Garth Ennis is. So the opening statement at the court is kind of cringe-worthy. It goes like this. This case is all about these families screaming for vengeance. They have come here to defend their faith. They don't want to be left in the sad wings of destiny. So, of course, the opening statement references multiple Judas Priest albums, and that is kind of cringeworthy. Rob Halford does relate a pretty funny story. He got his way riding the motorcycle onto the stage, and I think I'm gonna talk about this later, but one time when he went on stage with his motorcycle, there were some problems. They hadn't finished setting up the stage. There was smoke everywhere, and he drove the bike, and they were still raising a beam, and he smashed right into the beam, and he continued playing. But then after the concert, he was rushed to the hospital. But another idea that he had is he wanted to rollerblade, and the band put a stop to that. Rob Halford says that was probably actually a good idea. Of course, throughout the autobiography, he's talking about many of the bands that he meets along the way. One of them is Pantera, and he almost always has nothing but really great things to say about these other bands. And he gives some background information of the bands, and it's actually very interesting, but again, my focus isn't on that. However, he does have a story about Axl Rose, which is not so flattering, and I guess Axl Rose claims that he didn't say this, but he ordered that did not want Rob Halford using the motorcycle in the concert. But anyways, Rob Halford got that cleared up. At this point, Rob realizes that he has a problem. He really often falls for straight guys, and he's always chasing men who aren't available. And then there's another person that he's involved with, and he eventually finds out that he's straight. And at this time, he also starts trying to do his solo career, and he believes he was tricked by the record company. So the record company told him, it's just a formality, but if you want to make your own solo record, you have to announce that you've quit Judas Priest. And he took them at their word. He wrote the letter, and he sent it out. But he didn't talk to the band about it. It created this gap, and then there was no communication. And so he ended up actually leaving the band. And his solo career, it was like he was beginning anew. It was actually very rough for him. He was actually picked up for public indecency in Venice Beach. I believe he was in a restroom. The same thing happened to George Michael later. But again, Rob Halford is so lucky because the police, they charge him, but they don't alert the press and they let him go, and it doesn't get out. So Rob Halford's luck in this way just continues. One of the highlights of his career is he was asked to fill in for Ozzy at a festival, and he also met Madonna. He got to speak with her, and she started asking him about his tattoos and how far down they go. And they both decided that it would be safe to end the conversation there. One funny thing that he says, sorry, this is going to be bad language, but he says, "Butt fuck Alabama." And I laughed at that. So, of course, he meant a place that was in the middle of nowhere, right? So he met a soldier, and he was having long conversations with the guy, and the guy lived in rural Alabama. So at this time, Priest got a new singer, and so Rob Halford realized that the door was shut on Priest, like he couldn't get back in. And then comes the infamous MTV interview, and right in the middle of the interview, he reveals his sexuality. He felt that it was a long time coming, and he never looked back. He didn't have to worry about Priest anymore, because he wasn't in the group. He only had to worry about himself and the consequences for himself. And he says he recommends it to everybody. And he said supportive letters poured in, and he says he wrote something funny. Somebody either wrote or said, as they were walking by, "The fag is here," and he responded, "It's Mr. Fag to you." I thought that was really funny. He was out touring with his solo group, And he said the lowest point, this is pretty funny, the lowest point was in Switzerland. They sold 12 tickets, and the supporting act was a television showing the World Cup. Imagine. So he'd been used to playing to these stadiums that were filled, and then he was reduced to only selling 12 tickets. In this part of the book, he also makes a lot of comparisons with Bruce Dickinson, because Bruce Dickinson also left Maiden around this time, and he went solo, and Rob Halford was doing the same thing. So he talks about their careers, the trajectory of both of them. He was at a gay pride parade, and he saw Quentin Crisp. And I really like this part of the book, because here is this gay icon, someone who stood his ground and lived the way that he wanted. And he was like all of these people that he's met in the book. He's met Madonna, Cher, Andy Warhol. Now he's meeting Quentin Crisp. And Quentin Crisp was sitting in a tent by himself, ready to go on at a gay pride march. He was 90 years old, and in fact, a little bit later that year, he died. And Rob Halford got him to sign a book, and he states, "Oh, they bring me to all the gay prides." It's such a touching moment in the book, especially when he relates that a couple times in the book, he talks about how he met people, and then a little bit later, the person died. That happened with Bon Scott, also with Quentin Crisp. Of course, Bon Scott was much, much younger. He's been out of priest for over a decade, and he writes them a heartfelt letter, and he says, "Look, this is what happened. I'm at a point in my life where I really need to be back with Priest." He waited until their other singer had left. He talks about how Dimebag Darrell was killed on stage, and how that reflected for all performers. He meets the Queen of England. He had already met Freddie Mercury, the Queen, lead singer of Queen. He finally buys a wedding ring for a man, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, Thomas. But they're going to spend the rest of their lives together. He starts working on an album with Priest that is called Nostradamus, and it is a concept album, and he feels that this is his best work that he's ever done, and it is his favorite. He trademarks the term metal god, and he also works on solo Christmas albums that he really enjoyed. He attended Dio's funeral, who died of cancer. At this point of the book, he's talking about his parents. Both of his parents decline due to illness and death. He met Lady Gaga, and he really wanted to work with her. Lady Gaga bows down to him on stage. She sees him in the audience of one of her concerts. She stops everything. All the dancers are confused, and she just bows down to him. Now, over time, of course, the members of Judas Priest are getting older, and one of them is diagnosed with Parkinson, and he has a long struggle with this, but then it just becomes apparent he decides that he can't tour anymore. It's just the Parkinson's is so bad. So they have to make arrangements to get, a new member for the group. He also has a selfie with Lemmy from Motorhead, and this was also a little bit before his death. And at this point in the autobiography, we are up to the COVID crisis, the pandemic, and he's in his 70s. He's been with Priest for 50 years, and at this point he's been with Thomas 25 years, and this is where the book ends. However, there is a postscript. It's a year later. He also was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he was having some self-pity until he saw an ad or a program on TV of children with cancer, and he totally changed his attitude. He's like, "I'm already in my 70s and I'm just getting cancer now. I have nothing to cry about." And so he starts to take a more proactive approach. One funny vignette is when he's in the hospital, he's not allowed, after his surgery, he's not allowed to leave until he can fart. And it takes him at least a day until he's able to fart. And then they still keep him for an extra day to make sure he's farting freely. And he calls them trouser Trumpies, which is such a cute thing to hear from, the metal god. And what's so interesting is that he's very candid. He knows he takes himself with a grain of salt. He doesn't take himself so seriously. He says sometimes when he's singing a high note, he might be dribbling down there because of the surgery. But this is life, and he's an older man in his 70s. He's a metal god and a nappy. And this is where the book ends. Overall, it's a very, very positive read. But learning about his life, its arc, his career, his struggle with his homosexuality, all of this made for a really, really interesting biography, especially since most of the biography took place during my lifespan. So overall, I'm going to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this autobiography. I think if you're interested in metal, I think that this is well worth giving a shot. And if you can, I would listen to the audiobook, because then you get to hear it in his own voice. And it's like he's talking right to you. So I hope you've enjoyed my review. Again, I really appreciate any comments, and I want to thank you all for the support.